This morning, we start with the U.S. looking to put pressure on Russia in hopes it will back off from potentially invading Ukraine.
The UN Security Council will meet today, and the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations says the council is ready to put Russia on the defensive.
Council is unified. Our voices are unified in calling for the Russians to explain themselves. We're not going to be distracted by their propaganda, and we're going to be prepared to respond to any disinformation.
Over the weekend, more Russian troops gathered along Ukraine's border with Belarus, where they've been holding drills for days. Ukraine's defense minister says 130,000 Russian troops have now massed near the country's borders. All this comes as President Biden says he will move U.S. troops into Eastern Europe and NATO countries in the near term without giving a timeline. The president did not give a specific number of troops, only saying it would be, quote, not a lot. We have a team from Ukraine to Washington covering the growing tensions this morning. NBC News correspondent Aaron McLaughlin is in Kyiv, and NBC News White House correspondent Carol Lee is in D.C. Aaron, we're going to start with you. Despite Russian troops surrounding the border, Ukraine's president is telling Western countries that the U.S. should not create panic. What's the situation like in Ukraine?
Well, most people here, Joe, for the most part, are calm. You don't see anyone here in Kyiv panicking. That said, there is a small group of citizens who are so alarmed that they're now undertaking military training on the weekends to prepare for a possible Russian invasion. But that is not the norm here. It is worth pointing out that this is a country that has lived for the last 8 years under the threat of Russian aggression. Now, last night we heard from the Ukrainian foreign minister in a tweet calling out Russia, calling it to de-escalate the situation, saying that if Russia was really interested in not starting a, quote, new war, that it would withdraw its troops and engage diplomatically. We are expecting to hear more from the Ukrainian foreign minister in the next hour or so, but the rhetoric that we've been hearing from Ukrainian officials is in stark contrast to some of the dire warnings that we've been hearing from Washington. Joe.
Let's talk more about what we're hearing from Washington, Carol, and the UN meeting today. We just heard the U.S. ambassador say she's going to put a lot of pressure on Russia to stand down on any potential invasion. So what are the U.S. and its allies expecting out of this meeting?
Well, Joe, we're not expecting that there'll be any sort of action against Russia at this meeting. Russia has a veto on the UN Security Council, so it's not like the U.S. and its allies can take some sort of action against Russia in this particular venue. Russia, for what it's worth, has called this a PR stunt, but the U.S. hopes that it can at least put Russia on the spot, have them explain what exactly their intentions are with all of this military buildup around Ukraine, and really just to try to get some sort of diplomacy on track to see if there's still an option to do that. And the UN ambassador talked a little bit about that. Take a listen.
They have continued to escalate despite our efforts to try to find a diplomatic route for them and to encourage them to de-escalate. And part of the reason we're calling for this meeting on Monday is one more opportunity to find a diplomatic way out for the Russians.
Now, the U.S. is still waiting for a response from Russia to it had presented a list of responses to Russia's list of demands. The initial response from Russia was not positive, but they're still waiting for a fuller response. And meanwhile, the U.S. is saying that they are going to impose some very severe sanctions if Russia does move forward.
Now, Aaron, 3 U.S. officials told Reuters that Russia is now sending blood supplies to the Ukrainian border, along with other materials that are used to treat casualties. What are Russia and Ukraine saying about all of that?
Well, Ukrainian officials appear to be pretty upset by that report, putting out a harsh statement on Facebook saying it's categorically false. Let me read you what the Ukraine's deputy defense minister had to say. He said, this information is not true. Such news is an element of information and psychological war. The purpose of such information is to spread panic and fear in our society. And those concerns were echoed by the Ukrainian president himself, saying that he was concerned that some of these alarming reports from Washington would create undue panic and economic uncertainty here in Ukraine. That being said, U.S. officials are saying they are simply being transparent with Ukrainians as to the state of the situation, and that transparency continuing over the weekend. We heard from U.S. Undersecretary Victoria Nuland say that Russia shows no signs of de-escalating the situation, with some 30,000 troops now stationed in Belarus, enough forces, she said, for a full range of military options to be available to Russian President Vladimir Putin, including a full-scale invasion. She did say she saw a window for diplomacy, Russians signaling that they were willing to engage with the two proposals, one from NATO, the other from the United States, currently on the table. It is worth pointing out that the Kremlin has announced today that there will be a phone call between the U.S. Secretary of State and the Russian foreign minister for tomorrow. Joe.
Let's talk about American troops, Carol. President Biden says he plans to send more troops to Eastern Europe sometime soon. Quickly, any more clarification from the White House on the timing?
I spoke to an administration official over the weekend, Joe, who said that there's nothing imminent, that they wouldn't put a time frame on that. And there are a couple options that the president could take here. There are those 8,500 troops that the U.S. has put on high alert, meaning they could be deployed at any time. The majority of those would partner with NATO forces. NATO would have to activate its response force for that to happen. The U.S. could also send some troops unilaterally, a small group, if they wanted to, including if there was a need, they felt that there might be a need to evacuate Americans out of Ukraine. The Defense Secretary not ruling that out. Joe.
Carol and Aaron, thank you both. Appreciate it.
Now to some encouraging COVID news. Cases are dropping nationwide, down by a third over the past 2 weeks. The drop is making a huge difference for some hospitals that were, up until very recently, overwhelmed. NBC News correspondent Blaine Alexander has the latest.
Well, across the country, the numbers are painting a very encouraging picture. In fact, it's enough for the former CDC director to say that he is the most optimistic he's ever been about the pandemic. At the Cleveland Clinic ICU, the load was crushing. As one bed emptied, there was another patient right there to fill it. The National Guard and Air Force called in to help. Now, a different story. Across Cleveland Clinic's Ohio hospitals, the number of COVID patients has dropped from 1,200 to 393 in less than a month.
It's a significant relief right now.
Starting next week, elective procedures are back. The National Guard has moved out.
Overall, doctor, do you think the worst is now behind you?
I think so. I hope so. I hope we don't see another variant. And we'll remain optimistic.
It's a reflection of the encouraging numbers nationwide. A drop in new cases and hospitalizations down nearly 14%. But deaths, which lag behind, continue to rise in some places, with 31 states seeing an increase over the past 14 days. It comes as some places are dropping masks and restrictions. In Denver, the city's indoor mask mandate is set to expire this week. And in Orange County, Florida, the nation's 9th largest school district says starting this week, COVID concerns can no longer be used as an excuse for missing school. Experts are still cautious, but encouraged.
I'm more optimistic today than I have been at any point since the pandemic emerged. We have better tools, better defenses, better information, and better ability to make sure that COVID doesn't dominate our lives. We have the best chance to get and keep the upper hand against this virus.
And while overall the numbers are encouraging, there are still some areas that are seeing a rise in cases. In fact, 20 states have seen some sort of an increase over the past 14 days, mostly out west, with Montana being the highest, seeing an 86% increase in cases. In Atlanta, I'm Blaine Alexander, NBC News.
All right, thank you, Blaine.
Now let's bring in NBC News medical contributor, Dr. Kavita Patel. Doctor, so touching on Blaine's story there, do you think the worst of the Omicron wave is now behind us? Where do we stand overall right now in the fight against COVID?
Yeah, I do think it's good news, Joe and Savannah, that the worst of the surge is behind us. And I think overall we're seeing double-digit decreases mostly across the country, with the exception of some of the states that Blaine touched on. And then here's what's important. Those hospitalizations, we're at or near capacity in many hospitals across the country, but it is getting better day by day. What I think we're all kind of waiting for is like, when does this like really drop to even lower than like 4% positivity rates like we're seeing in New York? I think that might take several weeks, and that will also depend on this newer variant, BA2, and whether that takes a little more hold in the United States.
And Dr. Patel, another question from Blaine's story. There are some schools, cities loosening COVID restrictions like indoor mask mandates. What's your take on that? I mean, in your opinion, as we see these numbers drop, is it time to drop some restrictions, or is it too early?
Yeah, it's too early, and let's look at previous surges. When we've seen some of these restrictions removed, even just outside of school settings, restaurants, and in general, we have seen a slowdown in that decrease. And I think all of us want to get as closer to that kind of newer normal and get this behind us. But that is going to depend on some of our ability to keep what's working in place, especially, Savannah, when we still have a lot of people that need boosters and even their first shot.
And Dr. Patel, we have a viewer question for you. It's from Rich in Seattle. It says, I'm old, I'm a frontline worker, I'm 5 months past my booster. When can I get another? Do we have information yet on that? I know we don't know Rich's full situation there, but what would be your advice?
Yeah, Rich is in the same situation as many of us in the front lines that have received boosters. We're right at that 5-month mark coming into February. I do think that this is something that much of the world is looking at. Many countries, including Hungary and Israel, have already authorized 4th shots for healthcare workers, frontline personnel. We have not done so in the United States. Our current boosters have held up pretty robustly against Omicron. That's good news. So I think the key is just getting everyone boosted, knowing that that booster creates immunity broader than even the 5-month interval that required the booster in the first place. That's our hope. We don't need shots every 5 to 6 months. Hopefully this will stretch out, and we'll have more information on when we really need that 4th shot in the coming months.
All right, Dr. Patel, as always, thank you so much. And if you have a question you want to ask one of our doctors, please do let us know. They're ready to answer them. Email us at morningnewsnow@nbcuni.com and let us know if you want to stay anonymous.
The excitement is building for the Winter Olympics as athletes and officials arrive in Beijing ahead of Friday's opening ceremony. This morning, we're getting a closer look at the extreme precautions China is taking to prevent a COVID outbreak. That includes workers in hazmat suits and robot waiters. NBC News global correspondent Raf Sanchez has more.
With the Olympics just days away, athletes arriving in Beijing under the shadow of COVID. At least 39 competitors and team officials now testing positive. Among them, Polish skating star and medal hopeful Natalia Malashevska. While some Team USA athletes reach Beijing this weekend, others hit with COVID before even leaving the States. Bobsledder Josh Williamson announcing he tested positive on Instagram, writing, "This has not been an easy pill to swallow." The U.S. Olympic Committee says it's still very hopeful that the entire team will be healthy and able to compete in Beijing.
I think the single most important thing to remember as all these athletes go into these games is that you must control what you can and then disregard what you cannot.
Beijing on high alert ahead of the games under a strict zero COVID policy. Overnight, locking down several residential neighborhoods after 2 more cases were detected. Athletes and journalists alike subjected to intense testing on arrival, as NBC's Steve Patterson found out.
We're going to need to get through this. Immediately you see some of the hazmat suits up there.
A ghostly welcome to these strangest of games. Inside the closed loop of the Olympic Village, a look at some high-tech additions. Cafeteria workers are out, and robot cooks and servers are in. So don't expect any long chats with the bartender as he mixes your martini. And in a first for Winter Games, almost all the snow is man-made, raising questions about safety and the environmental impact. An unprecedented Olympics for an unprecedented time. Raf Sanchez, NBC News.
That was a fascinating look. All right, now to that winter storm that slammed the Northeast with records amounts of snow, ice, and wind for much of the weekend. The powerful nor'easter impacted Americans from the mid-Atlantic to Maine, dropping more than 2 feet of snow in some areas and forcing millions to dig out as they get ready for their morning commute.
I've been here all my life. This is a lot of snow for one time.
A lot of first responders on this street, like 3 nurses, a couple of state troopers, a couple of Boston firemen, so you got to try to help them out, you know, because they're at work helping other people. So
it's pretty bad. It's not too heavy, but it's a lot.
WBTS reporter Kirsten Glavin joins us now. Kirsten, good morning. So you're in South Boston. Now we know that area is known for narrow streets and very specifically residents who are super protective of the parking spots that they've dug out. How much snow did they get there this morning? What's it looking like, and how is it as people head out to work today?
Savannah, good morning. Thankfully, the snowfall is done here for now, but of course, the cleanup is far from over. Check out all of this snow here left over from this blizzard. You can see it piled up on people's cars. Still a lot of digging out to do today based on what we've heard from people getting it done over the weekend. It could take at least an hour or two. Now, it is very cold out here. It's been hovering around 10 degrees. I think people got lucky. A lot of the snow we got was light and fluffy this weekend. It's so not hard to shovel. Of course, it's not going to be pleasant for people to do it this morning out here in the cold, especially if kids are heading to school. Maybe people are heading to work and still have not cleared the way. The city is asking people to help continue to clear off sidewalks as kids head back to school, and I'm sure we'll see some morning commuters that do have to clear off their cars as well before heading out, which could definitely take some time. So, of course, you can see it right here. A lot more work to be done here in Boston.
Oh, yeah, some of those cars look like they are not going anywhere anytime soon. Kirsten Glavin, thank you so much.
As we just saw, much of the Northeast still digging out from this weekend's snowstorm. So what's in the forecast this week? Let's get a check on your morning news now. Weather.
Which means Bill Cairns joins us now. Hey, Bill, good morning.
Good morning. Now, that groundhog better cooperate. I'm looking for like a quick end of winter here. Yeah, we'll find that. We'll find out what Puxatawny and General Lee and all those other rodents have to say later on this week. All right, so let's get into what happened in Boston first. To summarize, you saw the big dig outs happening right now. It was a good day for the kids to play out there too. But this cold storm has brought the cold all the way down to Florida. And yes, we are showing you iguanas that sleep in trees. And when they get cold enough, I don't recommend that. It looks like they're toasting it. They fall out of the trees. So they actually have what they call a falling iguana watch in South Florida because it's been so cold. And yeah, you can see they just, they're warm-blooded, and when it's cold like that, their systems shut down. They don't die, they just shut down, and then when the sun comes back up, they get back up. So that's why they tell people to not be touching and playing with them. Pretty crazy stuff. All right, so let's get into the Boston biggest snowstorms in January history. This one came in second, so pretty impressive by even Boston standards. And here's those temperatures. It's really cold once again. I mean, there's not many places it's not cold, from Minneapolis to Maine, and there's a lot of areas in New England with that fresh snowpack that it's negative numbers right now. In Florida, it's a little warmer this morning than it was yesterday, but look at that little area near Fort Pierce, south of Orlando, 29 degrees. That's pretty rare to get down there. That's where you get into some of those orange groves, so that's not great. 42 West Palm Beach. Miami's a little bit better this morning at 50 degrees, and Key West even at 50. So we do have freeze warnings in place for interior, central, and South Florida. Frost advisories, Daytona Beach and areas near Lake Okeechobee. Tomorrow we'll get much, much better. So let's talk about that week ahead. We start quiet. And then, speaking of Groundhog's Day, the middle of the country is going to be a mess, a major winter storm. Snow from Colorado, North Texas. There's going to be ice in the middle of that storm. This could be a significant snowstorm for Chicago, Detroit, St. Louis, Kansas City. So keep that in mind if you have midweek travel plans. This storm is mostly a rain event for the East Coast come Thursday into Friday. Just a little bit of wintry weather in northern New England. We'll talk more about this upcoming next major winter storm next hour, guys.
All right. Iguanas, groundhogs. It was just a nature-packed weather forecast.
Oh, my gosh. And then we're going to have rain come wash all this snow. It's going to get gross. All right. Thanks, Bill. See you in a bit.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.